Nobody's going to tell you about the certain part of identity change. The one when the old self starts dying and it feels like panic to you. It feels like grief. It feels like your body is begging for the old version of you that was slowly killing you. Some of you are not here because life's unfair. You're here because the identity that used to get you through everything is dying because you want it to. The one who knew how to survive. The one who knew how to numb. The one who knew how to perform. The one who knew how to stay busy, stay needed, stay distracted, stay impressive, stay unreachable. But it's also conflict because that version of you got you here. That version of you knew how to function. That version of you knew how to keep moving. And now it doesn't understand why you're trying to kill it. That's why this chapter in life feels so fucking brutal to you. Not because you're broken, but because something in you that kept you operational through self-betrayal is finally being taken off life support. It's being taken offline. And your body is going to fight you the entire time. This is not an episode about a lonely time in your life. It's about the death of an identity that used to get you through everything. If you've ever felt your body beg for the old life the second you start changing, this one's for you. Welcome back to The Architect of Self. I'm Carl Gregory, licensed neuropsychotherapist, advanced certified clinical trauma specialist, applied identity researcher, and your humble host. Before we get into this, let me be clear. This podcast is not therapy. This is not mental health treatment, and I'm not your therapist. This is for educational reflection or confrontation. If you're in crisis, if you're thinking about harming yourself, or if you're in serious emotional distress, stop here and get real support. In the U.S., call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And with that, let's get into it. We are pausing the book chapters because I'm right in the middle of working with several people who are all in different forms of identity rebuilding, exploration, melting down, or remodeling. I thought it was important to draw this off the shelf, dust it off, and see if any of you can relate to it. So sit back, relax, keep doing the chores, finish your commute, or do whatever it is you do when you listen. Make sure you revisit it another time to pull out information you might have missed the first time through. So many of my listeners tell me that they do this, and it really helps them relate, understand, or make sense of things. Today we're talking about one of the most brutal parts of change, the lonely chapter. Not loneliness in the soft, sentimental sense. The chapter where the old identity is dying, the new one is still weak, and your body starts treating truth like it's a threat. There is a chapter in change that almost nobody talks about, honestly. Not the beginning, where everything feels bold, clean, and full of possibility. Not the breakthrough, where the results finally show up and people suddenly act like they believed in you the whole fucking time. I'm talking about the middle part, that ugly middle, the quiet middle, the expensive middle. The chapter where your old identity is dying, but your new identity still feels weak, awkward, unfinished, and socially expensive. That chapter has a name. It's the lonely chapter. And I'm not talking about the fake lonely chapter people post online because they want you to look deep. I'm talking about the real one. The one where you leave the marriage, put down the bottle, walk away from your job, stop playing the role, stop rescuing, stop shape-shifting, stop numbing, stop being useful in all the ways that once brought you a sense of belonging, and instead of peace, you get silence. Instead of applause, you get distance. Instead of relief, you get a body that starts acting like you made the worst decision of your life. Your jaw locks up, your chest tightens, your stomach drops, your sleep gets weird, your hands get restless, your breathing gets thin, and the room is quiet, but your nervous system is not. This is where most people misread what is happening. They think the loneliness means they chose the wrong path. They think the silence means they're lost. They think the discomfort means they should turn around. No. The lonely chapter is not mainly about being alone. It's about identity disruption. It's about standing in the gap between a self that no longer fits and a self that has yet to build enough proof to feel real. That's why it hurts the way it does. You're not just losing people. You're losing mirrors. You're losing routines, roles, habits, titles, systems, and relationships that used to hand you a recognizable version of yourself. You were losing the reflected image you knew how to live with inside. And now you're in the quiet with no old script, no old sedative, no old audience, trying to become somebody new before your brain, your body, and your history have agreed that this new person is safe to be. That's brutal. Not because you're weak, not because you're choosing wrong, but because identity change feels like grief before it feels like freedom. And grief is not just emotional. Grief is physical. It sits in the throat, in the sternum, in the gut, in the back of the neck. It makes silence feel loud. It makes stillness feel unsafe. It makes an ordinary Tuesday afternoon feel like withdrawal. Because in a lot of ways, that's exactly what it is. The brain does not worship truth first. It worships prediction. It worships familiarity. It wants patterns it already knows. It wants sequences it already has mapped. It wants known pain, known roles, known reactions, and known disappointments. It wants to know what comes next, even if the next thing is miserable. So when people say, if this change was healthy, shouldn't it feel peaceful? Well, the answer is no, not immediate. You see, the brain does not automatically reward what is healthy. It often rewards what is rehearsed. That old relationship may have been destructive, but the pattern was known. The old addiction may have been coercive, but the ritual was known. The old role may have been humiliating, but the performance was known. Your nervous system had a map. Your salience network knew what to watch for. Your body knew what posture to assume. Your mind knew what lie to tell to keep the whole thing moving. Then you broke the script. You stepped out of character. And now your prediction machinery is throwing a fucking absolute fit because it hates the gap between what it expected and what is actually happening. That gap feels like danger before it feels like expansion. That is why the lonely chapter feels so physical. The body is not just reacting to the present. It's reacting to the collapse of an identity it had learned to treat like home. A lot of people say, I miss my old life. Sometimes that's true. A lot of the time, it isn't. A lot of the time, what they really miss is being someone they already knew how to be inside that life. That's different. You don't always miss the marriage. Sometimes you miss being chosen. You don't always miss the bottle. Sometimes you miss the version of you that did not have to feel this exposed. You don't always miss the old job. Sometimes you miss the title, the rhythm, the competence, the illusion that you knew exactly who you were when you walked into the room. You don't always miss the chaos. Sometimes you miss being fluent in it. Sometimes you miss being the fixer, the caretaker, the overfunctioner. The one who could manage everybody else's mess because your own identity was built around being necessary. That's why I'd say it like this. A lot of loneliness is not social poverty. It's identity withdrawal. A familiar self stopped getting fed. The rescuer, the achiever, the addict, the martyr, the people pleaser, the emotional sponge, the hyper-competent one, the one who never says no, the one who always swallows it, carries it, handles it, absorbs it, and survives it. When that self starts dying, It does not feel noble. It feels like an internal static. It feels like confusion. It feels like the body is reaching for something before the mind can even explain what it is looking for. Your hand reaches for the phone before your values catch up. Your stomach drops when nobody responds because the old identity used to get instant proof. Your shoulders stay lifted because some part of you is still bracing for rejection. Your appetite shifts. Your sleep gets strange. You feel weird and exhausted at the same time. There is a buzz under the ribs, a clench in your jaw, a hollowness in your gut. That weird electric agitation that makes you want to text them. Explain yourself. Break the boundary. Pour the drink. Go back to the old role, just to give it 5 minutes of relief. And neurologically, that makes perfect sense. The amygdala tags emotional significance. The hippocampus links it to the context. Repeated behavior becomes expectation. Expectation becomes state. State becomes identity. Then people call it personality because they don't understand how much of what they call me is actually just a well-rehearsed survival strategy. So, when you stop performing an old self, the body does not clap for your courage. It panics because the pattern it memorized is gone. That's why people go back. They go back to the ex. They go back to the bottle. They go back to the old job. They go back to the old performance. They go back to the old lie. They go back to the old crowd. They go back to the old version of themselves that knew how to function inside a broken system. Not always because it was good, not because it was aligned, and not because it was healthy. They go back because it was familiar, because the old pain had a map, because the old dysfunction had structure, because the old identity, even when humiliating, was legible. They knew who they were inside. And the nervous system will often choose a known injury over an unknown freedom because predictability feels safer than possibility when your whole internal architecture is built around rehearsal. That's the trap. A lot of people don't return because the old life was better. They return because the old self was easier. And easier usually just means more practiced, more wired, more embodied. The over-explaining was practiced. The people-pleasing was practiced. The shutdown was practiced. The numbing was practiced. The hypervigilance was practiced. Even the suffering had muscle memory. That is the ugly truth. The brain does not automatically privilege what is true. It often privileges what is repeated. Then there is the second truth. People are not always rejecting the new you. Sometimes they are reacting to the death of the version of you that made them comfortable. That's the line. People love the language of healing until your healing disrupts their access. They love the language of growth until your growth costs them convenience. They say they want you honest, clear, grounded, sober, and strong until your honesty names the arrangement, until your clarity stops the confusion they benefited from, until your sobriety exposes their avoidance, until your self-respect ends the discount they used to get on you. Then, suddenly, you've changed. Suddenly, you're cold. Suddenly, you're difficult. Suddenly, you're hard to talk to. No. What changed is that version of you they preferred because it made their life easier, and it's no longer available. That's why nobody celebrates when you stop being who they needed, because a lot of people were never attached to your truth. They were attached to your function. They were attached to your compliance, your emotional labor, your predictability, your endless explanations, your willingness to stay small enough to remain consumable. And when that role dies, they do not always experience your change as liberation. They experience it as a loss of access. This is the relational wound of the lonely chapter. You feel it the moment after you hold a boundary, and nobody rushes to reassure you. You feel it in the heat crawling up your face after telling the truth. You feel it in the shaking hands after sending the honest text. You feel it in the throat when somebody pulls away, and the old part of you starts screaming, "See? This is why we stay useful. This is why we stay easy. This is why we don't tell the truth. This is why we perform." That reaction isn't random. A lot of the nervous system learned early that belonging was conditional. Adapt or lose connection. Stay useful or get punished. Be agreeable or become a problem. Anticipate others people's needs, and maybe you will stay alive. So, when you begin to individuate, when you stop shape-shifting for attachment, when you let truth occupy the room, the body reads it like a threat. Your heart races, your throat tightens, your gut flips. Not because the boundary is wrong, but because the old wiring still associates authenticity with loss. That is a brutal thing to realize. That some people did not actually know you. They knew your role. They knew your utility. They knew the arrangement. They knew what they got from the version of you that kept you center, weak enough to stay available. So when you stop providing that service, the room changes. The tone changes. The invitations change. The warmth changes. The access changes. And people call that loneliness. Sometimes it is loneliness. Sometimes it is exposure. Sometimes it is the moment you find out who had a relationship with your essence and who only had a relationship with your usefulness. Growth has social consequences. Truth has social consequences. Self-respect has social consequences. That is why this chapter gets so quiet, because the silence is often not empty. It's diagnostic. It reveals what your old identity was praying for. It reveals where your value was conditional. It reveals which rooms only welcomed your mask. Then comes the third truth. And this is where people either mature or crawl backward. The silence is not always failure. Sometimes it's proof that the old performance is no longer working. Most people do not know how to tolerate that. They interpret fewer calls, fewer texts, less access, less reassurance, and less reflected proof as evidence that they have taken the wrong turn. They panic. Maybe I changed too much. Maybe the old version of me was easier to love. Maybe I should soften it. Maybe I should explain more. Maybe I should just go back just enough to feel visible again. This is where people betray themselves. They confuse absence of applause with the absence of progress. And those are not the same thing. The old identity came with an audience. Even if that audience was dysfunctional, it was still there. People knew the script. They knew what version of you would show up. They knew how to engage you when you were still living on old terms. But the new identity? The new identity is awkward. It's underfed. It's unproven. Socially homeless for a while. It does not have the same crowd yet. It does not have the same rhythm yet. It does not even fully trust itself yet. That is why the lonely chapter is dangerous. People try to escape it before it has finished doing its work. But the goal is not to get through the lonely chapter as fast as possible. The goal is to survive it without resurrecting a dead version of yourself just because the corpse still gets recognized. That is the work. Because the old self still gets responses. The old self still gets invited. The old self still gets picked by broken systems. The old self still knows how to buy belonging with self-abandonment. But being recognized by the wrong system is not the same thing as becoming who you were meant to be. Just because the old version of you got more approval does not mean it was more real. Sometimes it was just more useful. And the body will beg you to go back long before your mind has the language to challenge the urge. It shows up as urgency, compulsion, restlessness. They need to explain yourself to people who understand you perfectly, but preferred you disorientated. The twitch in your fingers to send the text. The pit in your stomach that says, do something, fix it, get visible, make this stop. But not every bodily urge deserves obedience. Sometimes it is not wisdom. Sometimes it's withdrawal. Sometimes it's the old circuitry trying to close a prediction gap because the old model says, behave this way and you stay safe, included, wanted, and chosen. You are now violating the script and the system is triggering an alarm. This alarm is not always truth. Sometimes it's just the brain learning a new map of the hard way. So what do? You stop measuring progress by who claps. You stop expecting immediate peace after an identity decision. You stop assuming that discomfort means that you are off course. And you start building proof, real proof, behavioral proof. Not hype, not self-talk, not a cute quote on a black background. Proof in what you no longer tolerate. Proof in what you no longer chase. Proof in what you no longer numb. Proof in how you hold the boundary when it costs you access. Proof in how you stay sober when no one is handing out medals. Proof in how you tell the truth when the lie would make it so much easier to keep. Proof in how you remain aligned when nobody else is validating the shift. And part of that proof is somatic. It is the moment the chest tightens and you do not abandon yourself just to make it loosen. It is the moment your stomach flips and you do not confuse activation with danger. It is the moment your throat closes and you speak anyway. It is the moment your body remembers the old chapter and you decide not to go live there again. That is neuroplastic work in real time. Not theory, not a lecture, just reality. A new identity is not building insight alone. Insight is cheap. A lot of people understand their pattern and still kneel to it. A new identity is built when repeated congruent action teaches the brain and body a different association. Boundary without annihilation. Honesty without exile. Sobriety without self-erasure. Solitude without panic. Truth without collapse. Every time you stay aligned without returning to the old performance, you update the system. Every time you tolerate the wave of activation without turning it into regression, you are telling the brain, this is survivable. Every time you refuse to call back into the old role because the silence got too loud, you are breaking a circuit that used to run your life. That is how identity earns trust. Not because you simply declared it, because you repeated it again and again and again. Until what felt foreign starts to feel lived in. Until the boundary stops feeling theatrical and starts feeling normal. Until peace stops feeling suspicious. Until self-respect stops feeling lonely and starts feeling clean. Until your breathing changes faster. Until your jaw unclenches sooner. Until your shoulders drop without a fight. Until your old audience loses its hypnotic pull. Until the body stops treating your freedom like an emergency. That is why the lonely chapter matters. It forces a question most people spend their whole life avoiding. Can you remain aligned without immediate reflection from the outside world? Can you keep becoming when nobody is celebrating the shift? Can you stay loyal to the truth of who you are becoming, even while your nervous system is lighting up and the old life is whispering, "Come back. At least here you'll be recognized"? That is the test. And it is not abstract. It happens at 11 at night. In the body. In the insomnia. In the ache. In the agitation. In the quiet kitchen. On the lonely drive home. In the shaky pause before you're almost undo 6 months of work for 6 minutes of familiar relief. It happens when the prefrontal part of you knows exactly what is true, but the older circuitry still wants the sedative, the role, the reassurance, the ritual, the lie. That is not hypocrisy. That is layered wiring. Becoming requires that the higher truth be practiced long enough for the deeper system to stop treating it as an invader. So hear me clearly. You are not crazy for feeling disoriented in this chapter. You are not broken because the silent hurts. You are not weak because some part of you misses your old life, the old habit, the old role, the old relationship, the old self that felt easier to be. And you are not failing because your body still reacts. Of course it reacts. It learned that identity through repetition. It learned that role through consequence. It learned that pattern through survival. So yes, your hands may still shake when you tell the truth. Yes, your chest may still tighten when somebody is disappointed in you. Yes, your stomach may still drop when you are no longer instantly included, praised, texted back, or chosen. That does not prove the new identity is false. It proves the body is still catching up. But do not lie to yourself about what you are grieving. You are not always grieving love. Sometimes you're grieving familiarity. You're not always grieving the person. Sometimes you're grieving the identity you got to be around them. You're not always tempted because the old life was better. Sometimes you are tempted because the old life was safer and easier. And easy has trapped more people than pain ever did. So, do not run back to what recognized you just because your becoming feels quiet. Do not confuse being unseen with being wrong. Do not confuse the absence of celebration with the absence of growth. Do not confuse dysregulated body with a bad decision. Nobody celebrates when you stop being who they needed. That does not mean you should become the person again. It means the system is adjusting to your refusal. It means the old economy no longer pays out the same way. It means your brain, your body, and your relationships are being forced to reorganize around a self that is no longer for sale at the old price. That is what healing actually is. Not nicer language, not prettier coping, not a more articulate way to stay trapped. Real healing is a new internal condition, new threshold, new embodied expectations, new relational terms, a new baseline that no longer requires self-betrayal just to feel regulated. The lonely chapter is not proof you are lost. It is proof the old mask stopped working before the new face finished forming. The gap is brutal and good. It's supposed to be. It's where dependence on applause starts to die. It's where performance starts to crack. It's where your new identity learns to stand without borrowed mirrors. And it's where the body begins, slowly and imperfectly, to learn truth is survivable. That may be one of the most important things a person ever learns. Not how to be admired, not how to be quickly understood, not how to be instantly validated, but how to remain congruent, how to stay, how to breathe through the urge to disappear, How to hold your ground when your pulse says run. How to keep your center when the crowd goes quiet. Stay there long enough to become unrecognizable to the life that required your self-betrayal. Stay there long enough to build a self that does not need the old audience. Stay there long enough for your body to stop treating freedom like a threat. Because the goal is not to be celebrated by people who benefited from the old dysfunction. The goal is to become someone who no longer needs their celebration to know who the hell they are. This is the lonely chapter. Most people will not understand it or where you're at, and that's okay. It was never theirs to validate. It was yours to survive. Yours to build in. Yours to feel all the way through without sedating it, performing through it, dressing it up, or crawling backward just because backward was familiar. Maybe that is the point. Maybe the chapter that feels the quietest is the chapter where the real shelf finally starts speaking. Not just in your mind, but in your body, in your breath, in your posture, in your boundaries, in your refusal to go back, and in the brain's slow surrendering to a truth it fought at first, but can finally live inside. If this episode hit you, don't just nod at it and go right back into your old patterns. That's what most people do, and they call that reflection. It's really avoidance with better vocabulary. If you're serious about this work, go deeper. The books and the journals, they're all there for a reason. Not to motivate you for 5 minutes, not to hand you soft affirmations. They're built to help you confront your patterns, tell the truth, and stop outsourcing your life to the identity that's been running you. You can find all of it at carlhgreger.com. And on Substack, I go further into the ideas behind this work. The essays, the reflections, the deeper breakdowns, the stuff that doesn't fit neatly into a single podcast episode. So if you're the reading type, that's where you want to go. So go there if you're done skimming the surface. Read the work. Use the journals. Get the books. Do something with what you heard. Because nothing changes when insight stays theoretical. This is The Architect of Self, and I am Carl Gregory. And I'll see you in the next one. Stay in the fight.